Hey everybody, Deathblade here. It's been a while since I did a video. I apologize. I got really busy and tired and fell behind a little bit. I still have a big list of questions to get through to finish out this Chinese fantasy novel FAQ series. I'm going to do my best to keep those videos coming over the coming weeks and months. Another thing I have to point out is that I actually already recorded this video and had edited it and was exporting it and was just about to upload it to YouTube when I experienced a very just bizarre computer disaster. I'm not going to get into it now, but it was really weird, and I lost everything that I worked on for that one day, including the video. So I finally recording it again, and I'm going to get the video out there. Let's get into the subject, which is the ages of the people who practice immortal cultivation. I see comments about this a lot because what tends to happen, for those of you who might not read a lot of Chinese fantasy novels, is that the characters in the cultivation novels tend to live for a very long time. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions, billions, and even longer crazy periods of time. And what sometimes happens is that the characters don't act their age. They might be hundreds of years old or thousands of years old, and their behavior seems more like that of a teenager or maybe a young adult. And so I see people talking about this a lot. I think that there are some good lines of reasoning to explain why it does make sense for the characters to be like that. Before getting into those lines of reasoning, I want to point out that I think really the most important thing when you're reading the Chinese fantasy novels, especially the really fantastic xianxia or Xuanhuan type, I think the willing suspension of disbelief is probably the most important thing. I mean, the people that are writing these novels are not George R.R. Martin, and the novels are not Game of Thrones or, maybe the Kingkiller Chronicles or something like that. The authors are not taking years to fine-tune every single little detail and make sure that everything goes together in a cohesive way. The web novels are supposed to be easy to get into, easy to read, they go fast, they go on for a really long time, and although some of them do have complex plots and complex cultivation systems and things like that, the novels themselves are kind of full of mistakes and inconsistencies, and that's really not the point of the novel. So when it comes to this age thing, I think it's more important to kind of look at the story the author is trying to tell and not pick apart the details too much, because again, these novels aren't really about that. But I have seen a lot of readers comment about why they think the age thing makes sense. One of the main comments that I see most often is that when you're talking about people who live for really long periods of time, thousands and tens of thousands of years, decades or even hundreds of years doesn't really count for much. So for a character that will eventually live, 10,000 years, for them to be acting like a teenager when they're in their 50s or 100 or something, it makes sense because that's only a small portion of their lifespan. I think that to some extent that argument doesn't hold water if you really start thinking about it, because people's emotional development is based on how many years they've lived and what they have experienced. It's not based on the total amount of years that they will live. Besides, in the cultivation novels, people get killed all the time when when they haven't reached that 10,000 year or 100,000 year age limit. And I think, even in the modern era, people nowadays live a lot longer than they did in the past. If you go back 100, 150 years ago, depending on what country and, the specific time period, the life expectancy was much lower than it is now, maybe even by half. But that doesn't necessarily mean that people nowadays take a lot longer to become emotionally mature. So I think that argument in and of itself doesn't really explain the issue. But if you combine it with another line of reasoning, it kind of starts to get you headed in the general direction of an answer. And that is that, and I see this in the comments as well, people point out that the characters, despite being really old, spend a huge amount of time meditating. And that's the actual practice of cultivation, having the energy go through their body and becoming those immortal divine-like beings. I think that's a very legitimate thing to point out. Many times the characters will spend months and literally years in a cave or in a room or at the bottom of the sea, meditating and changing and becoming something that is not human. And so therefore I think you can't count those time periods as time in which they would develop emotionally and mentally. Another thing to consider is that they're not mortal, they're not human. They are they are immortal, or maybe demonic or devilish or whatever kind of thing they're becoming, but it's definitely not human. So to judge them by human standards probably doesn't make a lot of sense. If I was going to write my own immortal cultivation novel, I would probably take this whole thing into consideration. And in fact, I think it would be interesting to see a short story or novelette, or even just like an average novel-sized story that sort of delves into this topic, because it really is kind of interesting. Another thing to take into consideration is that the experiences that these people go through change them in ways that probably would be difficult for any of us to comprehend. So again, I think that it's definitely a really interesting topic that could be explored more in the genre itself. Okay, so this video was pretty short. I think that I've made the points I wanted to make. I'm curious if you have any lines of reasoning or comments about the subject that I didn't go over. Please leave them in the comments below. I'd be interested to hear that. And I will see you in the next video.